series of lessons called Igulim V'Yosher, we learned some very general introductions that dealt with some of the most basic concepts in the teachings of the Arizal, such as the Ein Sof and the Tzimtzum, the Halal and the Kav, as well as the 10 Sefirot and the 12 Partzufim that make up the circular Igulim and the linear Yosher elements of the 5 worlds: Adam Kadmon, Olam Ha'atzilut, Olam HaBeriyah, Olam HaYetzirah, and Olam Ha'asiyah. However, in this series of lessons, we'll progress on to learning many finer details about the emanation of the spiritual worlds, and especially about the many stages between Adam Kadmon and Olam Ha'atzilut. We've already learned that although every single spiritual world, as well as every single Sephirah, has one circular distinction called the Igulim, as well as another linear distinction called the Yosher, nevertheless, the teachings of the Arizal speak almost exclusively about the linear Yosher aspect of the spiritual realm. And why is that? Because physical man is also built in a linear fashion, with a head, a mid-section, and a lower section, as well as a right side, a left side, and a middle section. For this reason, physical man is able to relate to the linear aspect of the spiritual worlds much more than to the circular aspect. Therefore, from this point onwards, we'll also focus on the linear aspect of the spiritual realm, and especially on the linear aspect of the first and the greatest of all the worlds, Adam Kadmon. As we enter this very long and in-depth discussion about Adam Kadmon, we must take to heart that the Arizal points out that as a rule, we are not permitted to speak about the world called Adam Kadmon itself, that is to say, about Adam Kadmon's internal light, in reverence of the great spiritual level of this world and its almost far-fetched hidden existence. Rather, our discussion in this series of lessons will be limited primarily to the different lights that came out of Adam Kadmon in order to emanate the world called Olam Ha'atzilut. However, before we can begin to talk about the different lights that came out of Adam Kadmon through his hair, and his ear holes, and his nostrils, and his mouth, and his eyes, and his forehead, we must first become familiar with a few more very fundamental principles in the teachings of the Arizal. First of all, we must know and take to heart that every single spiritual entity is always comprised out of 4 private elements that are called Ab, Sag, Ma, and Ben, or Asmab in abbreviations. The common denominator between these 4 private elements is that they are all essentially permutations of the holy 4-lettered name Yod-Kei Vav-Kei, what we call the Shem Havaya. If so, then the obvious question is, what differentiates between these 4 private Yod-Kei Vav-Keis? The difference between them is evident in their expansion. The first Yod-Kei Vav-Kei is known as Shem Ab, since Ab, Ein Bet, is the numerological value of 72, what we call the Gematria. As indeed, this expanded Yod-Kei Vav-Kei has the Gematria of 72. This Gematria is known as the Yod-Kei Vav-Kei of Yodin, for the fact that it is comprised out of 4 Yod letters. The second Yod-Kei Vav-Kei is known as Shem Sag, since this expansion has the Gematria of 63. The expansion of Sag Samech Gimel is also a Yod Kei Vav Kei of Yodin, however, with one single difference, as the letter Yod in the expansion of the letter Vav changed here to the letter Aleph. The third Yod Kei Vav Kei is known as Shem Ma, Mem Hey, since this expansion has the gematria of 45. This expansion is known as the Yod Kei Vav Kei of Alephin, for the fact that it has 3 Aleph letters. The fourth Yod Kei Vav Kei is known as Shem Ben, Bet Nun, since it has the gematria of 52. This expansion is known as the Yod Kei Vav Kei of Heyin, for the fact that it has 2 Hey letters. However, notice how in the expansion of the letter Vav, there isn't a letter Hey. Therefore, the resultant gematria is exactly 52. As we mentioned earlier, these 4 variations of Yod Kei Vav Kei represent 4 different levels of spirituality. The expansion known as Shem Ab is the greatest of all 4. Next, in descending order, is the expansion known as Shem Sag, followed by the expansion known as Shem Ma, ending with the lowest expansion of all 4, which is Shem Ben. In order to impress upon us the hierarchical relationship between these 4 expansions, the Arizal teaches us that they correspond to the 4 letters of the holy 4-letter name Yod Kei Vav Kei. How so? The expansion of Shem Ab corresponds to the letter Yod of the holy Yod Kei Vav Kei, which is the first of all the letters. Therefore, it is only fitting that the highest expansion should correspond to the first letter of Yod Kei Vav Kei. The expansion of Shem Sag corresponds to the first letter Hey of the holy Yod Kei Vav Kei, which is the second letter of the 4-lettered holy name. Therefore, Shem Sag is the second highest expansion of the 4. The expansion of Shem Ma corresponds to the letter Vav in the holy Yod Kei Vav Kei, which is the third letter of the 4-lettered name. This is why Shem Ma is the third highest expansion. Finally, the expansion of Shem Ben corresponds to the second letter Hey of the Yod Kei Vav Kei, which is the 4th and last letter in the holy 4-lettered name. Inasmuch, it is only fitting that the lowest of all 4 expansions should correspond to the 4th and last letter of the Yod Kei Vav Kei. And as we pointed out, these 4 expansions are known as Asmab in abbreviation. Since throughout this series of lessons we'll be speaking about the 4 expansions known as Asmab, therefore we'll continue to clarify how these 4 spiritual levels correspond to the 10 Sefirot, as well as to the 5 Partsufim that every spiritual entity is comprised of. More often than not, the expansion of Shem Ab relates to the Sefirah Chokhmah and to the Partsuf Abba. However, in truth, the Sefirah Keter and the Partsuf Arich Anpin also correspond to the expansion of Shem Ab. After all, the Sefirah Keter and the Partsuf Arich Anpin correspond to the upper tip of the letter Yod of the Yod Kei Vav Kei, as the tip of the Yod is actually part of the letter Yod. Inasmuch, then the expansion of Shem Ab corresponds to the Sefirot Chokhmah and Keter, as well as to the Partsufim Abba and Arich Anpin. The expansion of Shem Sag corresponds to the Sefirah Binah and to the Partsuf Ima. The expansion of Shem Ma corresponds to the 6 Sefirot: Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, as these are the 6 Sefirot that correspond to the Partzuf called Ze'er Anpin. Finally, the expansion of Shem Ben corresponds to the Sefirah Malchut, as well as to the Partzuf known as the female counterpart of Ze'er Anpin. Now, we'll introduce yet another method of dividing and classifying these 4 spiritual levels, what we call the 4 levels of Tanta, which are the abbreviations for Te'amim, Nekudot, Tagin, and Otiyot, all of which we'll define in detail soon. However, before we proceed any further in this discussion, I must inform you that the Arizal constantly switches between these 2 classifications known as Asmab and Tanta. Therefore, we must become familiar with these 2 methods of dividing the spiritual realm, Asmab and Tanta. As we mentioned before, Tanta is the abbreviation of Te'amim, Nekudot, Tagin, and Otiyot. The Te'amim are the cantillations. The Nekudot are the vowels, i.e., the punctuations. The Tagin are the crowns of the letters. And the Otiyot are the actual letters. And although the Arizal speaks of these 4 elements in reference to the 4 different levels of spirituality, nevertheless, the concept of Tanta is also alluded to in the 4 elements of the Sefer Torah and its reading. The Te'amim are the cantillations with which we read the Torah in a musical fashion. As we know, the cantillations are not actually written in the Sefer Torah, but nevertheless, they are definitely an integral part of the written Torah and its traditional reading that originated at Har Sinai. In fact, in the writings of the Arizal, we find a very deep explanation as to why the Te'amim are not actually written in the Torah scroll. The Nekudot are the vowels which instruct the reader how to properly pronounce the letters and the words that are written in the Torah. As we know, the vowels are also not written in the Torah scroll for the very deep reason that the Arizal clarifies in his writings. The Tagin are the crowns above the letters of the Torah. The Talmud in Masechet Menachot teaches that the letters that spell out Sha'atnez Getz have 3 crowns on top of them. Meanwhile, the letters that spell out Bedek Chaya have only 1 crown on top of them. In contrast, the letters that spell out Mel'echet Sofer are written in the Torah without any crowns on top of them. As we know, the Tagin are actually written in the Torah scroll. Finally, the Otiyot are the actual letters that are written with ink on the Torah scroll. As we stated before, what we just described is the manifestation of these 4 spiritual levels in the physical Torah scroll and its reading. However, from now on, we'll be focusing upon how these 4 Tanta divisions set up the hierarchy in the spiritual realm. We'll proceed by clarifying how the 4 levels known as Tanta correspond to the rest of the spiritual levels that we mentioned earlier on in our discussion. The Te'amim correspond to the letter Yod of the holy name Yod-K, Vav-K, to the expansion of Shem Ab, to the Sefirah Chokhmah, and to Partzuf Abba. the nekudot correspond to the first letter Hey of the holy Yod Kei Vav Kei, to the expansion of Shem Sag, to the Sephirah Binah, and to the Partzuf Ima. The Tagin correspond to the letter Vav of the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei, to the expansion of Shem Ma, to the 6 Sephirot Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, which, as we mentioned, are associated with a partzuf called Ze'er Anpin. The Otiyot correspond to the second letter Hey of the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei, to the expansion of Shem Ben, to the Sephirah called Malchut, and to the partzuf known as the female counterpart of Ze'er Anpin. In order to better appreciate the relationship between the 4 spiritual elements known as Tanta, we'll examine the relationship between the physical equivalents of these 4 spiritual elements, and in doing so, we'll be able to infer from the Tanta in the revealed physical realm to the hidden spiritual realm that we're currently learning about. By all means, the Otiyot, i.e. the actual letters, are the lowest and the coarsest element of all 4, since they correspond to the physical letters that are written with physical ink on top of the physical parchment of the Torah scroll. Certainly then, the Otiyot have a physical existence in and of their own, that is to say, even without somebody reading from the Torah. The Tagin, i.e. the crowns, are also relatively coarse, since after all, they are also written with physical ink on top of the physical parchment of the Torah scroll. Inasmuch then the Tagin also have a physical existence in and of their own, even without somebody reading from the Torah. If so, then why are the Tagin classified as a higher level than the Otiyot? Since the physical crowns are always written in ink on top of the physical letters, therefore this alludes to the fact that in the spiritual worlds, the Tagin actually have a higher stature than the Otiyot. Unlike the Otiyot and the Tagin that do have a physical form in the Torah scroll, the Nekudot, i.e. the vowels, do not have a physical representation in the Torah scroll. After all, the vowels are recognized only when somebody actually reads from the Torah, as during the reading of the Torah, the breath of the person reading gives life, so to speak, to the inanimate ink letters. And although in truth, even the breath of the person reading from the Torah has a physical nature that can be sensed in our physical world, nevertheless, its nature as airy breath is relatively much lighter and much more internal than the coarse nature of the inanimate letters and crowns, for the fact that these nekudot come out from the innards of a living person. This is why in the spiritual realm, the nekudot have a higher stature than the Tagin, and ever the more so, higher than the Otiyot. With all that said, the Te'amim, i.e. the cantillations, are the highest and most internal element of all 4, even more internal than the Nekudot. Why is that? Upon first impression, neither the Te'amim nor the Nekudot have any physical presence in the physical Torah scroll. Nevertheless, the cantillations are indeed higher and more internal than the vowels, for the reason that when a person reads from the Torah without the cantillations, his reading is much flatter, without the added element of inner emotion on behalf of the reader. However, when the reader adds the element of the cantillations to his Torah reading, his reading is elevated to the level of song, what allows him to express his inner emotions as he reads from the Torah. This is why the Te'amim are considered to be an even higher and more internal element than the Nekudot, not only in the physical world, but more relevant to us in the spiritual realm as well. We'll end off by clarifying that although we just spoke extensively about the 4 levels of Tanta with regards to their manifestation in the physical world, in the embodiment of the Sefer Torah and its reading, nevertheless, our real goal is certainly to clarify the root of the Te'amim, Nekudot, Tagin, and Otiyot in the spiritual world. However, since we are, after all, only physical human beings, therefore we're able to relate to the Tanta in the physical world much more than to the root of the Tanta in the spiritual realm. This is why we spoke extensively about the physical Sefer Torah and its reading as a parable of sorts to help us understand the Tanta in the spiritual realm.